These are just blue light glasses. They're not actual glasses, but I wore them in a vlog recently and I literally love them. So I'm wearing them for this video. Hey guys, it's Hannah, and today I'm coming to you with a video about some underrated book series that you should read. So I recently read 2 book series that I absolutely fell in love with, and I realized that they're pretty underrated. Like, almost nobody talks about them. Even if they did used to talk about them at some point, they're not that big on BookTube or even like the book community online, and I really don't understand why, because I think that they're incredible and more people should read them and talk about them. And so that got me inspired to make an entire video on some book series that I think are deeply underrated and more people should read. So I have 5 book series here that I think are very, very underrated. That doesn't mean that they're not popular. There are definitely some popular series in here. Some of them have been on the New York Times bestsellers list before, but I think that they don't get enough hype. Like, I just don't see people talking about them very much. There are a few people who obviously talk about them, but I want them to become more popular and more mainstream. So when I say they're underrated, I'm not saying that they're unknown. They're definitely known series, but they're ones that I think should have as much readership as like books like Throne of Glass and the Six of Crows duology, because I think that these series deserve that type of readership. First up, we have a duology that is by one of my all-time favorite authors. I've talked about this series multiple times. I've talked about all of her books many, many times, but that is the Monsters of Verity duology by Victoria Schwab. This is the first book in the duology, This Savage Song. The second book is Our Dark Duet. Essentially, this series takes place in a dystopian kind of fantasy world where monsters exist, and there are 3 classifications of monsters: Korsai, Malkai, and Sunai. And mostly the story is about humans and monsters living together, but not exactly coexisting. And we follow our 2 main characters, August Flynn and Kate Harker. August is a monster and Kate is a human, and it's about how their stories converge and what it means to be a monster and what it means to be human, who draws that line and who defines it. I don't like saying too much more than that because I don't think you should know too much about it before you go into it. It's definitely one of those ones that you want to experience on your own, but it's truly one of my favorite series and duologies of all time. I know that Victoria Schwab is obviously a very, very popular author, but I feel like this series doesn't get as much love as I think it deserves. It definitely doesn't get as much attention as her other series, and I think that it's on par with all of them. Honestly, I think Our Dark Duet, the second book, is probably my favorite Victoria Schwab book because it's just such a well done conclusion and it breaks my heart. But yeah, I highly, highly recommend this series. I think that it deserves to be more popular and I want more people to read it, especially so that more people can cry about the series with me because it's very lonely in my single puddle of tears. Next up, we have another series that I know has like a pretty strong fan base, but I feel like no one actually really talks about this series all that much, and I feel like more people should because it's kind of what everybody likes in fantasy, yet it's kind of somehow stayed under the radar, and I don't think it should be because it's great. And that is Truthwitch by Susan Dennard. This is the first book in the Witchlands series, and I have read this one and half of the second book, so I haven't finished it yet. And the third and fourth books are also out right now as well, but I love this series despite the fact that I haven't even finished it yet. This story takes place in a fantasy world where there are very different types of magic and powers. So we follow around Safi, who is a truth witch, essentially meaning she has the ability to discern truth from lies. And we also follow the perspective of Iseult, who is a thread witch, and that kind of means that she can see the threads that keep people interconnected, like their lives, but she can't see anything that's connected to her. The magic system is extremely unique and so well done. There's also elemental magic within it as well, like people who can control fire and water. And I've mentioned this series before in my video about books that remind me of Avatar: The Last Airbender, because this is definitely one of those series. I know it was an actual inspiration for Susan Dennard when she was writing this series as well. And the main plot is essentially that war is coming to the Witchlands, and these 2 girls, along with the help of a lot of other people, have to try and stop it. I feel like the plot sounds pretty generic and basic when you think about it, but I think that the way that this story interweaves its magic system with the actual plot of what's going on is beautifully done, and I think it makes it really unique from a lot of other YA fantasy series that you see. I love the topics that this series covers. I love the friendship between Safi and Iseult, and I love the romances in here as well. There's a lot of angst and there's lots of drama as well, which is something I really like in my fantasy series. And so I can't recommend it enough. I think it's such an underrated classic YA fantasy series that totally deserves more hype, and I cannot wait to finish reading it. Next up, we have another series that I have mentioned a couple of times somewhat recently, but it's one that I really love, and I feel like almost no one really talks about. I've heard a few people talking about it for sure, but I feel like almost no one's read it, and more people should really read it because it's great and totally unique within YA, and that is Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. This is the first book. I believe the series is going to be a trilogy. The second book, The Vanishing Stair, is already out. Already read it. Already love that one too. But this is a YA mystery series, and it follows the story of this girl named Stevie Bell who goes to Ellingham Academy, and Ellingham Academy is like this boarding school for specially gifted students, and they have like a very weird admissions process. You don't really like fill out an application. They kind of let students in based on their passions. So if someone has like a very deep passion for something and has worked towards that, those are the students that are admitted into this school. And Stevie gets into the school because she has a deep love for true crime. So she studies true crime all the time, and she's been especially fascinated with the case that took place at Ellingham Academy in the 1930s. In the 1930s, there was a murder and kidnapping that took place in the school, and Stevie has always wanted to uncover this mystery, so now that she gets to go to the school, she also has the opportunity to learn some more about it. That's all you really need to know, because again, it's a mystery series, so you don't want to know anything else. I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but all I can say is that it's so good. One thing that I always notice whenever I'm reading mysteries is that I tend to predict what's going to happen all the time, like really early on. And so then it's not fun because you want to be surprised. And I've experienced that with so many different mysteries and thrillers that I've read, but that did not happen with this one at all. I could not predict almost anything that happened. And so it totally kept me on my toes the entire time. And the plot twists and turns were exciting. And it was just great when I wasn't anticipating everything that was going to happen. I'm sure other people will have different experiences because I feel like we all can guess at different things. But at least for me personally, I don't think that this series is at all predictable, and I don't think that any of the twists and turns are that obvious. I will say that there are a couple in the second book that were easier for me to guess, but at least the first one definitely was not able to guess at anything that happened, and I just really loved the story. It's totally captivating, and it's just such a fun read. So I highly suggest picking this one up if you're looking for something that's mysterious and fun, and again, another series that I just think is totally underrated. Like, more people need to be reading this and talking about it. Even if people are reading it, more people should be talking about it. Moving on to the last two series that I have, this first one here is one of the ones that I read recently that I fell in love with. I know that this is a series that was actually very popular, especially around the time that it came out, and I feel like almost everyone has read it, but it's been out for so long now that almost no one talks about it anymore, and that is the Graceling Trilogy by Kristen Cashore. It took me forever to read this series because I have owned this since I bought Twilight for the first time, which means like when I was in 7th grade. So I've had this forever and I just never read this trilogy, and I finally read it and now I love it so much. If you don't know, the Graceling Trilogy is actually a trilogy of companion novels. So we have Graceling, Fire, and Bitter Blue. I actually ended up reading the books out of order. I know that a lot of people are mad at me for that, but I wanted to read them out of order. So I read Graceling first, which is the first book, then I read Bitter Blue, which is the third book, and then I lastly read Fire, which is actually supposed to be the middle book. I will say my favorite one is Fire, closely followed by Graceling. I like them almost equally. And Bitter Blue I also enjoyed very much, but it just wasn't my favorite. But I think that's what's so great about this series, because you can find one that you deeply love and you don't necessarily have to love the other ones, but the fact that each of the characters are kind of threaded within the other stories is just so fascinating, and I love getting to read books like that. I went into this series knowing almost nothing, like at all, except that there are people in this world called Gracelings, and in Graceling, our main character Katza is a Graceling who has the ability to basically like fight anyone. She's just extremely strong. Like, she's been able to kill people ever since she was like 10 years old or something. So people in this world have different graces. And I feel like that's all you should really know, apart from the fact that each of these stories are very like romance based, and I was not aware of that before I went into it, and I was pleasantly surprised, but I feel like it's something you should know before you start them in case like that's not really what you want to read. Each story is essentially a standalone fantasy novel. It can stand on its own with a centric romance romance that is just really deeply heartwarming. The ones in Graceling and Fire are my two favorites, and this one is very, very romance-centric, I'll definitely say that, whereas I feel like Fire is just far more based around Fire as a character than it is around her romance. And I love Fire as a character, which is why I liked that one the best, I think. But yeah, these books took me completely by surprise. I feel like they're just such beautiful, happy stories. Like, they deal with a lot of like dark, intense stuff for sure. There's just something about the end of each one that feels extremely hopeful, and that's what I really appreciated about this trilogy. So yeah, like I said, I know that this is actually a well-loved series and it's been deeply loved by a lot of people for a very long time, but I kind of want it to have a resurgence because I think it deserves that, and I feel like more people should be talking about it because it's just that wonderful. All right, and lastly, moving on to the very last book I have on this list of underrated series that you need to read. This is one that I read recently, like right after I finished Graceling, and I was just completely taken. Like, this series has now instantly become one of my all-time favorites. I am so obsessed with it. I have read both of the books that are currently out. I've loved both of them so, so much, and I just cannot stop praising this series because it's just that good. And that is The Last Magician by Lisa Maxwell. This is the first book in the series, and the second book is called The Devil's Thief. Like I said, I've read both of them. I love both of them, and you should also read them because they're amazing. The second that I finished this book, I went on my Instagram story and I just started talking about how much I loved it because I just needed to express that because no one talks about this series and we're just like all sleeping on it, and it's so, so good. The way I like to describe this is that it's a mix of Six of Crows, A Darker Shade of Magic, and The Diviners. And if you like those series, like I do, because all three of them are on my favorites list, then you will absolutely love this. It's a historical fantasy series, that's kind of how I would label it, that has time travel and alchemy and magic and literally everything that I love in fantasy. It takes place in New York City in 1902, so during the Gilded Age. The plot revolves around our main character Esta, who is from modern day New York, who has the ability to time travel. So she time travels back to 1902 in order to stop this heist from happening and stop this object from being destroyed. I don't really want to tell you anything else, but basically she has to go back to the Gilded Age, and so much happens, like so much happens, and it's all incredible. One of my favorite things about this series is the way that it talks about immigration during this era, because it was a huge thing in New York City. Like, Ellis Island was a big deal, and there are a lot of books that take place during this time period and don't actually talk about that, and it was so refreshing to see it in a fantasy book and discussed extremely well. So magic in this world has been oppressed by people without magic, and it kind of weaves itself into the oppression of immigrants as well during this era, and I just like can't even express how good it is. Like, it's just so well done. The drama in here, the action in here, the romance in here, I cannot. It's fabulous. I was just so completely floored by this series because I did not expect it to be anything other than just kind of like basic, but oh my god, I just fell in love. So yeah, I highly, highly recommend it. I feel like everyone should read it because like nobody talks about it, and everyone should be because it's wonderful. So if you're looking for at least one of these series to start with, I say start with The Last Magician because it's my fave. I'm obsessed. All right, so there you all have it. That is it for my list of 5 underrated book series. I hope you all enjoyed watching this video. Please let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these series on this list. Do you agree with me that they are underrated and that more people should read them so that we can all convince people to read them, because I need more people to read these books. Also, do please let me know if there are any other underrated book series that you think I should check out, because I'm always on the lookout for some more good series that are going to take me by surprise. If you'd like to follow me on any of my social media, all my links are in the description box as always. But thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!